Hey, greetings, everyone. I am joined today by a good friend of mine, another fellow Kansan social worker. I'm going to let her introduce herself. Uh, my name is Gray Endress, and I'm a social worker in the Kansas City metro area, although I live on the Kansas side, and a professor at Missouri Western, where we have a BSW program. My partner, take it away.
I am Tara Wallace, and I am a licensed specialist clinical social worker in Kansas. I am also a professor at Central Texas College, which is located in the Fort Hood, Killeen area. And I teach online social work classes.
Yeah, I think that's just the way it is right now. A lot of online stuff.
Definitely.
You're also some other things you're involved in Topeka, um, in regards to children of color and child welfare. And then you and I are both involved in Kansas Appleseed in the Strengthening Families, Rebuilding Hope Coalition.
Yes. Just one of many things that we do related to child welfare and addressing issues in the child welfare system and making things better for children.
Yeah, that's definitely our goal. So today is a 1 hour free ethics CEU for social workers, counselors, marriage and family therapists. While Tara and I are both social workers, and we don't profess any expertise in regards to counseling or marriage and family therapists, we did dive into their codes of ethics. So that way this 1 hour CEU is relevant to all mental health professionals, especially those that work in child welfare that have master's degrees in counseling, social work, or marriage and marriage and family therapy. So again, we don't profess to be experts in those areas, but we thought it would be really important to try to include everybody in this workshop. All right. So these are a few headlines that have been in Kansas. Now, we're talking mostly about Kansas, but the truth is this, Tara and I will both agree to this. It doesn't matter what state, you could take the word Kansas out and stick in your state, and you're going to have your own headlines of failures of child welfare. And these are a few of ours from Kansas. Which one of these stands out the most to you, Tara?
Actually, all of them, because there's no way to separate them really. When you look at financial mismanagement, it kind of creates a snowball, and you can draw a line that goes through every single one of these because financial mismanagement leads to confusion and misunderstanding because somewhere along the line, that's going to influence how programs work. Programs don't have enough money, there's misunderstanding, miscommunication. Employees are going to feel like they're not getting paid to do what they're supposed to do, they're overworked, they're underpaid. Then you have issues going on, things are happening, people don't know about it, they find out through the rumor mill, it hits the news, and people are wanting to know what's going on. So there's a lack of transparency. So all of those combined, all of them are issues that need to be addressed.
You know, living in the metropolitan area of Kansas City and being a licensed social worker in both Missouri and Kansas, I try to pay attention to both states. And in Kansas as well as Missouri, in 2018, as their evaluation came out in regards to their federal guidelines, both Kansas and Missouri failed more than 50% of the federal guidelines. They failed them miserably. And I always make this really simple comparison. Take a moment, and I'm talking to the listener, take a moment and just think about your favorite restaurant, right? Right now, my wife and I really, since the pandemic, have enjoyed, carry out from Nick and Jake's little restaurant in Shawnee, Kansas. And if your restaurant failed 50% of their food handling health guidelines, the next time you went to that restaurant to grab a meal, it'd be closed, but not child welfare. It's just business as usual. And unfortunately, it takes headlines like this to capture people's attention. For the listener, if you're not aware, both Kansas and Missouri were successfully sued. Kansas settlement has just come to fruition here in January of 2021, although it's not been rolled out yet. And you know, why is that okay? You know, why is it these headlines have to come out to create change? Why can't change create itself? So we're going to do 3 cases. Tara and I, having done one other ethics workshop together, we believe in some case examples. So we have 3. The first one, though, is not a Kansas example. It is an example out of Florida. And this is a headline story out of USA Today in October of 2020. For 7 years, foster kids came and went out of this foster home. The quarters were so cramped that at times children slept with the foster parents in their master bedroom. I can't even imagine that occurring, but it did. This foster family was the longest tenured family in St. Augustine in Florida, and more than 70 kids passed through their home. Then there was an arrest for child sexual abuse. But following that arrest, not caseworkers, not the child abuse investigators, not law enforcement, no one talked to any of the other kids who had lived in that home, including the parents or the caregivers of those kids, wherever those kids ended up at. Maybe they're in another foster home or a group home, or maybe they were reunified with a grandparent or an auntie or their own parents. No one had reported to those kids that they had lived in an environment where there was child sexual abuse. I've always been really empowered by this thought from Stephen Turnell. He's the author of Signs and Safety, and he writes that just by working in a state-run child welfare institution, it immediately puts you or puts the social worker at odds with the code of ethics, given the lack of transparency. Can you imagine your child or a child that you're a therapist for or you're a counselor for having lived in a home where there was sexual abuse occurring or sexual trafficking occurring, and nobody reached out to tell that child or that child's caregivers? It's unfathomable.
And that's one of the issues and one of the reasons why I went into private practice, because there reaches a point where you have to decide, are you really in this for the agency? Are you in it for the good of the children and families? And I just did not believe that that was something that I could justify to myself. I had to make that call and go into practice for myself, because I needed to know that every night I could go to sleep being satisfied and being okay with the decisions that I made. I might not be popular. People might not like me as an individual, but I could be at peace knowing that I did the right thing. Because, and I tell people this all the time, at the end of the day, one of the things that sticks with me the most from grad school is that I have to protect my license. There are paper trails, there are all kinds of things that follow me throughout my profession. And I have to remember that at the end of the day, my license is what's on the line. And I can't say that I didn't do the right thing because the supervisor told me not to check with this family or not to alert this family and let them know that their loved one stayed at a home where there were children removed because there were reports of abuse by the foster parents. Yeah. Long-standing history. I can't live with that.
In fact, I think this is a good time to just, throw this out there to the audience, to the listener. What is your definition of integrity? I was in an Eagle Scout Board of Review. I'm actively involved in Scouts with my 4 sons. And in this Board of Review, one of the other board members, He's not a social worker, he's a carpenter. The carpenter turns to this young man who's getting his Eagle Scout and says, how do you define integrity? And so the scout, kind of for a moment was quiet as he was thinking about his answer, and then he gave his answer. And the carpenter said, that's a pretty good answer. My answer is, when you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's a piece of trash in front of you, you bend over and pick it up, not because someone's seeing you do it. You bend over and pick it up because it's the right thing to do. You do the right thing, not because people are watching you, but because it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
So anytime I do an ethics workshop, I think it's important to give the participants, the audience, a little bit of a framework for anytime we have to think about ethics and do an ethics audit. So I'm going to buzz through this here really quick, and then Tara and I are going to jump into some cases. We've got 2 cases to present to you. So anytime you're in an ethical dilemma, I think it's really important to think about your framework, whether you're a counselor or a marriage and family therapist or a master's level or bachelor level social worker. And how are you going to, wade through this ethics? And one way to do that is to take a quick audit. So number one, you're faced with this audit. Is it at the micro level, the meso level, the macro level? Are you in private practice? Are you a graduate student? Are you in clinical supervision? Are you a part of a team? What is the dilemma? Who is it impacting? And then here are some steps we might consider. Number one, what is the worker, the social worker, counselor's familiarity with their code of ethics in regards to this dilemma? Does their code of ethics speak to this dilemma? Number two, wherever you're working at, whether it be a large agency, a team, a smaller agency, private practice, are there any agency protocols or policies that you should consider following? And then always reach out to someone, seek supervision, because 2 brains, 3 brains are always smarter than 1 brain. Number 2, step 2, what are your core values in regards to this issue? What are societal values? And where do they rank in your professional values? And I always use this very simple example. I'm sitting with a client, he's 14 years old, haven't seen him in a while. I'm doing kind of a checkup session with him. And I ask him how it's going, and he says, hey, there's something I got to tell you. I remind him that, confidentiality and what the limits are. And he says, well, I need to tell you something. I don't want you to tell anyone. And I say, hey, it depends on what it is. And he says, well, I've been using marijuana. And so quickly, I have to go through my personal values, societal values, and the values of my profession. So personally, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 14-year-old using marijuana isn't a 10. It's not a 10 for me. That's my personal issue. It's maybe a 2.7. It's pretty low. Societal values, it would be a much higher than a 2.7 for society. Professional values, nowhere in the NASW Social Work Code of Ethics does it specifically address a 14-year-old using marijuana. You have to ask yourself, does it rise to what's called a compelling professional reason? So I asked the client a couple quick questions. I say, where are you getting, this marijuana? And he says, well, there's a guy down at the Casey's that sells it. He works at the Casey's. He's kind of old. He's in his 20s. And, he sells these, bags of marijuana to kids. So now I have to recheck my values, societal values, and professional values. So how do I feel about a 20-year-old or 30-year-old selling marijuana to a minor? That's a 10. How does society feel about that? That's a 10. How does my professional values, rate now? That's a 10. That's a compelling professional reason. So again, it just depends on what's being presented and how you evaluate that. Next, I have to identify alternative actions that will protect to the greatest extent, because my responsibility is to that 14-year-old. And is there a compelling professional reason to tell anyone? In the beginning, maybe no, but now that there's a 20 or 30-year-old selling it at a, gas station, now there's a compelling professional reason. So which of my alternatives are going to protect to the greatest extent? And what can be done to minimize conflicts between steps 1, 2, and 3? Right now, they all line up because I'm a 10 about an adult selling marijuana to a minor. Society values would be a 10, and professional values would say this is a compelling professional reason. I need to look at least harm, least restrictive, and then weigh and consider both the short and long-term ethical consequences of my actions. Where am I going to go first? I'm going to go, in this particular case example, I'm going to, go to mom. And the 14-year-old and I are going to go talk to mom. In fact, I'm going to say to the client, I think we need to tell your mom. And he'll say, oh, don't do that. She'll kill me. And then I'll say, oh, I'll keep her from killing you. And, let's do this together. Do you want me to tell her? Do you want to tell her with me present? How are we going to do this? Because that's that part of integrity, doing what's right isn't always easy, but frequently it's hard, but it's always right. And I staffed a case here recently, Tara, where a school social worker shared with me her supervisor had told her to tell clients no if they're asked about a hotline. Tara, did you hotline me? And then you would respond with no because your supervisor told you to lie. And see, that's that part that really rubs me the wrong way because that goes against our integrity. Nowhere in the LPC, the MFT, or the Social Work Code of Ethics does it say it's okay to lie to a client. That just doesn't exist.
And that's a whole integrity issue for you as an individual because that creates the perception that you are a professional that is not to be trusted. And so
Absolutely.
what does that say to you in the future? Because those individuals will now speak to other people about you to say that you're not necessarily someone that can be trusted.
In fact, I asked the school social worker, I said, did you ask your supervisor why she told you that? And the school social worker said, yeah, I did. She said to protect the relationship. And it's true. I've had clients upset with me because I had to do a hotline, but I at least have that transparency that I've told them I'm going to do it. And so they are upset with me, but at least there's that integrity of honesty and transparency, and I can repair that. But if it comes out that I lied, I don't think you can ever repair that with a client. I think that's unrepairable. So we always want to consider clients' rights, confidentiality, the rules, service delivery, conflicts of interest, supervision. I told the social worker that I supervise, hey, if your work supervisor pushes back on this, throw me under the bus because I'll be glad to visit with them about the integrity of transparency. And then, of course, what are the ethical standards? So for us, as a social worker, our standards are divided into 6 sections. Our responsibility to our clients, our colleagues, our practice settings, the profession in general, as professionals, to the profession in general, and 6th, that is the broader society, how they can hold us, accountable. So let's jump into 2 cases here. Here's the first case.
So before we get on that case, I want to say something that I noted, and that is that one of the most important things that you emphasized and that you showed when you went through those steps is that number one, you didn't just go through those steps and stop. You went through those steps and then you went back through those steps again. And then you went again. And that's necessary because most people tend to just think that that's a linear process and then you're done. But the world doesn't work that way and situations don't work that way. And I think that's part of the problem is that individuals come into situations thinking that they have to go through that process one time and they're done. And that's how you damage relationships. And that's the biggest part of what made that the scenario with the 14-year-old that you identified so easy to manage is that you have relationship. And when you have relationship, it's easy to do those difficult things because you have respect. Relationship includes respect.
That is perfect. And I think that's beautiful that you pointed out it's not linear. It is very much cyclical. You go back through it, you go back through it, and that might be minutes, right? We're not talking sessions, but it could be sessions, right? To constantly, build our alliance with our client in that relationship. You're absolutely right. That's spot on.
Definitely. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is, especially what you emphasize with the student that you're supervising, is that when I go into a therapeutic relationship, I work primarily with children, and I tell their parents, when we're doing paperwork at the very, very beginning, if I ever have to report, I will tell you that this is a situation that I have to report, and I would like us to do it together. And I let them know before we even set the first appointment that I need to know that if that comes up, that that is something that you and I can do together, because I'm also going to report that you and I have identified a plan that is going to be included with the report. Because
Absolutely.
I'm not going to throw you under the bus and say that you're this horrible parent that allowed this situation to happen. I'm going to identify a situation that happened that impacted your child, and we created a plan that is going to help your child. But we are doing the responsible thing by alerting the authorities, and we are giving them an opportunity to be part of the plan that we have created together, so that you're not alone if they have to become part of that plan as well. I'm not going to just walk away. I've never, ever just walked away from a parent that I've had to report. And I've done it several times. And they've been with me when I've done that process. I've never reported a parent that hasn't been there with me.
Yeah, I just think that's really important. And
Absolutely. And that relationship is what has allowed me to do that. Even early on in a therapeutic relationship, I think it's important for the parent to know that I need you to trust me. And it may seem like the worst thing in the world, and I don't have good feelings when it happens, but I still need that relationship. And this is something we're going to get through together. I just don't throw a parent out there. So now we'll get to the case example. An LMSW and PLPC foster care social worker coordinated an emergency foster placement for a teenage girl in the home of two women. The LMSW and their agency asked the two women to continue the placement as regular foster parents. During the home study update, the two women disclosed that they were in a committed relationship with each other. The couple asked that the LMSW not report the nature of their relationship to the court and the placement agency. The LMSW believes that the agency and/or the judge might not allow the placement of a child in the home of a lesbian couple, but feels strongly that the women will provide a safe, nurturing home for the teenager, who has stated that she feels safe with the two women. So we need to be aware of our own biases regarding clients.
absolutely. And those tie right into the Code of Ethics. Section 1.07, 1.06, and 1.05 talk specifically about the rights of confidentiality, conflicts of interests, and cultural awareness, and our own biases. Because you're absolutely right. You may have a very strong feeling about this couple being a lesbian couple, but at the end of the day, it's really what's best for the client. It's not what's best for your bias. And then I included at the bottom, we have 6 core values in social work. And one of the values we've been talking about today, which is what this ethical workshop's all about, is integrity. And integrity is defined as behaving in a trustworthy manner. So here your clients have said to you, please don't tell the judge. So we look at some of our partners, the MFTs and the LPCs, they also have, MFTs have a high standard of professional competency and integrity. They too have to work within a framework of integrity. And LPCs, ethical behavior is the value of practicing in a competent and ethical manner. So, what's the solution to this case example, Tara?
So having done many, many home studies, I have never had to include that information. I've never had to identify any kind of information related to that. I stick specifically with the information that is included on the home study form. I don't go into specific detailed information regarding anything that is not asked for on that application, because you are getting into information that can be discriminatory and that is more personal, that touches on information that individuals do not need to provide on those applications. If the application changes, that's a regulation. And I have not seen, it's been a couple of years since I've done a home study, but to my knowledge, that information is not requested on the application.
Yeah, I don't think it's a compelling professional reason that mandates me violating the client's confidentiality. The nature of their relationship is the nature of their relationship. And I will just throw this out there. It's a myth to believe that your notes are protected. That's a myth. If your notes are subpoenaed, your notes are subpoenaed, and you'd have to go in and redact information. So I'm not even sure I would put it in my notes when I take the home study. The home study. The safety issue is, in that Florida case, the kids didn't have rooms to sleep in, and they're sleeping with the foster parents. That is a compelling professional reason to bring to the attention of a licensing worker. The relationship of that couple, or the relationship in this case example of two women, it doesn't rise to that case. It's not a mandated report. So
Absolutely not.
I think that it would be easy to protect that confidentiality. Not being in check with our own biases causes that conflict of interest, and being aware, culturally aware, that includes the understanding of gay and lesbian couples, and to understand, and if it's outside your framework or outside your expertise in diversity, then you've got some work to do there.
Absolutely. And as it is written, that as the information is provided by the individuals in that home, that is how the information is provided on the application. As they fill out their application, that is how the information is included in the home study. So if they state verbally that they are a married couple or they are in a relationship, but they do not provide that information in writing on their applications, that is what is provided in the home study.
Absolutely. So Tara and I have this wild dream that we're going to wake up someday and child welfare is going to be better. And so, what would that look like? I think it would look like a lot of things. One of the things that I'm most passionate about is that children and families would have a voice. They don't have a voice. I'm also passionate that 75% of the kids in foster care in the state of Kansas wouldn't be children of color. We've got a real problem there when our state is only 5.4% African American. So what are your thoughts, Tara? If you wake up tomorrow and there was a miracle that had occurred, what would you be looking for?
Wow. if we all woke up tomorrow and the culture of child welfare changed for the better, what would it look like? It would look like child welfare would be a system that has an extension of multiple agencies and programs that provide resources, connections to programming, to community-based, non-traditional resources and services that support families in whatever way addresses the cultural and holistic needs of each individual family that approaches them. The family would feel confident that approaching the child welfare system for support would not be a detriment to them.
Absolutely. I think when you and I did our previous ethics workshop, and I will make sure to include a link in where this workshop is being held at. But you and I talked about in that previous workshop, just going into foster care creates trauma for the child. And then the failures of child welfare, the multiple moves, being a child of color and being in, homes that no one looks like them, that is just additional trauma. And that's not child welfare. I don't know what that is.
I have told individuals that it is really, really hard to see for many individuals that this system on paper looks great and on paper works, but in actuality is created to perpetuate itself, in that children are removed and that removal creates trauma. Children respond to the trauma. If they are returned home, they are traumatized, and that impacts the family functioning, which creates more trauma in the family system, which spills over into other environments such as the school. The school reaches out to the same system that created the initial trauma and says, this family is dysfunctional, you need to get involved, which brings the exact same system back into the family's life. And then that cycle continues.
To the next generation.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at case number 2. An LMSW or an LPC is working in a private foster care agency, but is concerned that their agency has been taking some shortcuts. They speak with their supervisor, which is the correct thing to do. While meeting, the supervisor acknowledges their concerns, but asks the mental health provider to keep their concerns to themselves until otherwise noted. A few days later, the supervisor asked them to shred any and all notes, emails, or reports concerning the shortcuts, as it would hurt the agency's reputation in the child welfare community. I wish that was a made-up scenario. Unfortunately, it is not. So here are a few ethical considerations, starting with social workers. Number 1, 3.04, client records. We should take reasonable steps to ensure that the documentation is accurate for the services provided. 2.1, social workers should take adequate measures to discourage, prevent, and expose and correct the unethical conduct of colleagues. I think that's hard. I think I've met people, Tara, that are like, I don't want to ruin that person's career. I don't want to throw that person under the bus. But when you walk away knowing what's going on and you choose not to report it, I mean, am I wrong? Aren't you now part of the problem? You're contributing to the problem?
Absolutely. And you become part of it.
I think the best example is that sexual abuse case at Penn State, the Sandusky case. People at Penn State knew that that assistant coach was molesting high school recruits, but nobody did anything about it. So in looking at some of our mental health partners, MFTs, 4.1, exploitation, we should avoid it. We should address it. 3.6, maintain accurate client records. LPCs, A1.B, records and documentation, create, safeguard, and maintain documents necessary for rendering professional services. You don't get to just shred them. We take reasonable steps to consult with other counselors and look at their code of ethics when we have questions regarding our obligation, our professional practice. Again, it's built right in there, just like our code of ethics. Go seek some assistance when someone tells you to do something that's not right. Again, I don't think it doesn't feel to me like rocket science, right? But why is it these struggles continue to occur and make the headlines? So let's talk a little bit about barriers to change. So we both share with you our miracle dream, right? We wake up and child welfare is a better place. One of the problems that's holding this failure of child welfare in place is this norm called adult centrism. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit today. It's this default setting in child welfare that we, right, we are the experts of our clients. But integrity and value the dignity and worth of others says we're not the experts of our clients. Our codes of ethics, whether you're an MFT or an LPC, says that it's our partnership and that our clients are the experts of their lives. This norm of adult centrism in child welfare is supported by 4 power blocks. Number 1, this need to rescue the child. Number 2, this unconscious bias that we've kind of talked about. You have to be aware of your biases. We all have them. And to blindly follow old or outdated practices. And the notion that confidentiality supersedes transparency. You know, what that headline at the beginning of this workshop, people demand transparency. Frequently, you know, Tara and I only hear about, you know, really awful cases when they make the news. And it, you know, when there's been a child fatality, and it shouldn't be that way. We've got to challenge these norms that are holding these problems into place. So kind of as we come back around here to transparency, this is a headline out of the Kansas Reflector. This is an online newspaper, news service. Protesters demand more transparency. How do we get there, Tara?
So I think that we are on to something in Kansas. One of the things that we talked about was the Office of the Child Advocate. And I think that would be an amazing first step to transparency in Kansas, because that individual would not have the ties to child welfare that previous offices have held, which would give them the freedom to actually work for both the agency and the family from a neutral standpoint. And that's absolutely necessary. You're not protecting the agency, the reputation of the agency, the money, the budget of the agency. You're representing the best interest of children, families within the guidelines and the framework of the laws and the policies and the practices of the agency, without having to protect the reputation. And that is so needed.
Absolutely. And as we kind of get close to wrapping up, we're going to cover 2 things that are barriers or proponents of change. And this is called first and second order change. And what Tara is describing is second order change. The case examples we looked at today were first order change. Tara, you were going to talk a moment about first order change, and I'll do second order change.
Sure. So first order change works within an existing system, a structure and a view of the world, and it's tinkering, basically tinkering, doing more or less of something that would make the process better or more accurate, like making incremental changes. And that's what the Department for Children and Families has been doing since the Child Welfare System Task Force first released their recommendations, actually before. Some of the recommendations that came out of the task force were already in place. They had already started working on some of those changes, and that's great. But some things needed to happen in addition to that. And that's what Grace is going to talk about right now.
And I would just say adding or hiring or firing people does not guarantee second order change. Because in all reality, you have to truly address the culture. You have to look at the norms that are holding those problems in place.
Mhm.
And that is creating second order change. And second order change is change that's irreversible. So losing weight, right? Me going to the gym to swim and lose a little weight, that's well and good, but it's really first order change, because if I quit going to the gym and I continue to eat, I'm going to gain that weight back.
Mhm.
So just hiring and firing people doesn't guarantee first or second order change. But in all reality, second order change is much harder when systems are this large. And child welfare is a large system that continues to fail, and it's business as usual. Again, using that example, you couldn't go to your favorite restaurant if it failed 50% of its, food and health, guidelines. It would be closed.
Mhm.
So the Office of the Child Advocate might just be the beginning of some second order change, but that person has to have some teeth. That position has to have that neutrality. Otherwise, it just becomes first order change, which would be, disappointing. So thank you so much for, tuning in to Tara and I today. We would really appreciate your feedback. Was this helpful? Did it scratch an itch for you? It is just 1 hour of ethics. All of us need 3 hours of ethics. Um, there are instructions where this video is hosted to download a survey and download a questionnaire, complete those and send them back to Missouri Western in the email that will be provided. And then Missouri Western will then send you your CEU certificate. But we really would like to know, what you thought today. Was this helpful? What could we do, to do better? Are there topics you'd like to see us to address? And hey, when the pandemic's over, we'll go on a road trip. We'll come visit you. We'll do an ethics
Yes.
workshop. You just have to let us know what you need.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.